A love that transcends time. In a small village nestled between gentle mountains and endless meadows, two hearts were destined to find each other. Where it all began. The village of Meadow Spring was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where cobblestone streets wound through ancient buildings and wildflowers grew in every corner, where life moved at the pace of the seasons, and love stories were written in the quiet moments between sunrise and sunset. Here lived two souls, each remarkable in their own way. Thomas was a dreamer, a young man who saw the world through the lens of stories yet to be told. With his worn leather journal always tucked under his arm and reading glasses perpetually perched on his nose, he spent his days lost in worlds created by his literary heroes. Hoping one day his own tales would grace the shelves of bookstores, he frequented the village library, a place that smelled of old paper and possibility. He'd sit by the window for hours, scribbling furiously, pausing only to gaze out at the world that inspired him. Sarah was an artist, a woman who painted the world not as it was, but as it felt. Her small cottage on the edge of town was surrounded by a garden that exploded with color in every season. Rose bushes climbed the stone walls. Lavender lined the pathways. Inside, canvases leaned against every surface, each one capturing a moment, a feeling, a fragment of beauty she'd witnessed. She spent her mornings walking through meadows with her sketchbook, capturing the way light fell on wildflowers, the curve of a bird in flight, the play of shadows on water. They lived in the same village, breathed the same air, walked the same streets. Yet their paths had never crossed until one spring afternoon when fate decided to intervene. The meeting Thomas had claimed his usual spot at the village cafe, a corner table near the window where natural light was, perfect for writing. His notebook was open, his pen moving across the page, lost in a scene he was crafting about two strangers who meet by chance. Sarah, seeking respite from the intensity of her thoughts, wandered into the same cafe. She needed a quiet place to sketch, to translate the jumble of ideas in her mind into something tangible on paper. The cafe was nearly full, but one table remained, right across from where Thomas sat, completely absorbed in his writing. As Sarah made her way to the empty table, something made Thomas look up. Perhaps it was the movement in his peripheral vision. Perhaps it was something more. Their eyes met. In that single moment, the bustling cafe faded away. The chatter of other customers became white noise. The clinking of cups and saucers disappeared into silence. Thomas found himself captivated by the warmth in Sarah's smile, genuine, unguarded, like sunshine breaking through clouds. Sarah was drawn to the creative spark she saw dancing in Thomas's eyes, the look of someone who truly saw the world, who paid attention to details others missed. With a courage that surprised him, Thomas stood and approached her table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice slightly nervous. "I couldn't help but notice. You're carrying a sketchbook. Are you an artist?" Sarah smiled, her nervousness matching his. "I try to be." "And you—" she gestured to his open notebook. "You're a writer?" "Aspiring," he admitted. "Would you like to sit together? I'd love to know what you're working on." And with that simple invitation, their journey began. Discovering each other, they talked for hours that first day. The cafe staff eventually had to politely remind them they were closing. Thomas and Sarah met again the next day, and the day after that, and soon meeting at the cafe became the highlight of both their days. They discovered they shared a way of seeing the world through a lens of beauty and possibility that most people had lost somewhere along the way. Thomas introduced Sarah to the authors who had shaped his thinking. He read passages to her, his voice bringing the words to life in ways that made her see why he loved them. Sarah showed Thomas her sketches, explaining how she tried to capture not just what things looked like, but how they felt. She taught him to see the extraordinary in the ordinary, the way afternoon light transformed a simple stone wall into something magical. They explored Meadow Spring together, discovering hidden corners they'd never noticed despite living there for years. A tiny garden behind the church, a footpath that led to a perfect view of the valley, an old oak tree whose branches formed a natural cathedral. Every place they went became sacred, marked by their shared experience of it. The challenges, but as their love deepened, challenges emerged. Thomas's dedication to his writing often meant late nights hunched over his desk, candles burning low, words flowing faster than he could capture them. Sometimes he'd become so absorbed in his stories that hours would pass without him thinking of anything or anyone. Else Sarah would feel forgotten in those moments, unimportant, like she was competing with imaginary characters for his attention, and Sarah had her own struggles. Years of criticism had left her doubting herself. She'd look at Thomas, brilliant, articulate, destined for something great, and wonder what he saw in her. Wonder when he'd realize he deserved someone better. These insecurities would sometimes bubble up, creating distance where there should have been closeness. They had arguments, misunderstandings, moments when they wondered if love was enough to bridge the gaps between them. But through it all, they learned something crucial. Love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other again and again, even when it's difficult. Thomas learned to close his notebook and be present, to show Sarah through his actions that she was more important than any story he could write. Sarah learned to trust what she saw in Thomas's eyes every time he looked at her, not doubt or disappointment, but genuine love and admiration, and their bond grew stronger with every challenge they overcame together. The promise one evening, as autumn painted the village in shades of gold and crimson, Thomas took Sarah's hand and led her to the town square. Fairy lights had been strung between the old buildings, creating a canopy of twinkling stars. Musicians played softly in the background. The whole scene felt like something out of a storybook. Thomas stopped beneath the lights, his heart pounding so hard he was certain Sarah could hear it. "Sarah," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "you've shown me that the greatest stories aren't the ones I write in my notebooks. They're the ones I live. With you," he dropped to one knee, pulling a simple ring from his pocket. Nothing extravagant, but chosen with care. "Will you let me spend the rest of my life discovering new chapters with you? Will you marry me?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears, the happy kind that blur your vision and make your heart feel too big for your chest. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, laughing through her tears. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Thomas stood and pulled her into his arms, and as they kissed beneath the fairy lights, the small crowd that had gathered erupted in applause. Building a life together. Their wedding was everything it should be. Intimate, joyful, overflowing with love. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising not just to love each other in the easy moments, but to choose each other in the hard ones too. They promised to support each other's dreams, to be each other's safe harbor, to grow together rather than apart, and they kept those promises. Years passed. Thomas finally published his first book, dedicating it to Sarah, who taught me what true stories look like. It wasn't a bestseller, but it touched the hearts of those who read it, and that felt like success. Sarah's paintings began to sell at local galleries and eventually beyond. People were drawn to the emotion she captured on canvas, the same depth of feeling that had first drawn Thomas to her. They faced new challenges together. Financial struggles when money was tight. Grief when loved ones passed. The everyday stresses that test every relationship, but they also experienced profound joys. Children who filled their home with laughter and chaos. Grandchildren who looked at them and saw what love should be. Quiet mornings drinking coffee together, comfortable in the silence. Through it all, the triumphs and the trials, the laughter and the tears, they held on to each other. The legacy decades later. Thomas and Sarah would sit on the porch of their cottage, now surrounded by gardens Sarah had spent a lifetime cultivating. Their hands, weathered by time, would still reach for each other automatically. "Do you remember the day we met?" Sarah would ask, though she knew Thomas remembered every detail as clearly as she did. "The cafe," Thomas would reply, smiling. "You were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen." "I was nervous," Sarah admitted. "I almost left without saying hello." "I'm glad you didn't," Thomas said, squeezing her hand. "I'm glad we found each other." "Do you think we would have if we hadn't met that day? Do you think we were truly meant to be?" Thomas considered this, as he always did. "I think we were lucky to be in the right place at the right time. But I also think we chose each other, every day, and that's what made it real." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over Meadow Spring, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The story lives on in the village of Meadow Spring. The love story of Thomas and Sarah became legend, parents told it to their children as a bedtime story. Young couples would visit the cafe where they first met, hoping some of that magic would rub off on them. The spot in the town square where Thomas proposed became a favorite place for other proposals, and when people asked what made their love so special, so enduring, the answer was always the same. It wasn't that they never struggled. They did. It wasn't that everything came easily. It was that they chose each other. Every single day, in big ways and small, they chose love. They showed the world that true love isn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It's about showing up, being present, supporting each other's dreams while building your own, forgiving mistakes, celebrating victories, weathering storms together. It's about two imperfect people refusing to give up on each other, the ending that never ends, and so, in a small village nestled between mountains and meadows, a love story was written not in a single moment, but across a lifetime. It was written in shared glances across crowded rooms, in hands held through difficult times, in laughter that echoed through their home, in quiet moments of understanding that needed no words. It was written in the life they built together, not perfect, but perfectly theirs. And long after Thomas and Sarah were gone, their story remained. A reminder that in a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain, love, true, committed, chosen love, endures. For anyone who doubted whether such love was possible, their story stood as proof, not because it was easy, but because it was real, and that, in the end, is all that matters.